Welcome to Microdose Psychedelic Insights, powered by the Conscious Fund. This is the Psychedelic Insider Series, fireside chats with industry leaders in the psychedelic space.
How are you doing, Brett?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. I mean, it's COVID and
it is.
Things are weird and different.
Very weird. I was just talking to your compadre there about how probably everybody in the space starts off a podcast or whatever this is by a webcast by remarking how there's no more vacations and weekends and everything is eternally busy.
It feels that way. I mean, and it feels like the opportunity with COVID has been to wind that back, with people working from home and, having more supposed freedom and flexibility. My optimistic hope was, we'll usher in UBI and the 25-hour work week or 30-hour work week, kind of like what they have in Scandinavia. And I think it's just going to be a lot longer until that actually happens in the States. We're still.
Yeah. I don't see it happening. I mean, not until we have a social safety net of some kind. I mean, those of us who are busy with things that pay the bills are really privileged at this point in this country.
Exactly.
And they're still kicking people out of their houses, and while they take billions of dollars for themselves.
Yeah, it's disgusting. Would be a good way to deal with that. But it's cool to record a live conversation with you. We've had many conversations.
Oh, yeah.
We did the event at the Alchemist Kitchen a few years ago, the microdosing event with the writer and Alex and whatnot, but we've never had a one-on-one, and so it'd be good to dive in a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's funny. I didn't realize that you were the host of this until I went on LinkedIn, and then it said hosted by Paul. I was like, oh, okay, interesting. That was this morning.
Too cool. Yeah. Patrick had mentioned to me, and I was like, oh yeah, I know Brett really well. We've known each other for years, but we've never had recorded public conversations. It'll be good to dive into this. So let's just start with, obviously I know a little bit about your background, but just for the listeners and the audience and whatnot, just to have what have you been up to the last 5 or 10 years, in particular in the cannabis space? Mm-hmm. And then love to hear about how that's been transitioning into the psychedelic space. And, Psymposia obviously happened within that as well. So just sort of what's been your career story in this area the last, let's say, 5, 8, 10 years or so?
Well, I'll start 13 and a half years ago, because that's kind of when
you're just an OG. Really got started. You're a total OG, aren't you?
Well, it was 13.275, but, who's counting? But it all started when one of the world's leading cannabinoid scientists broke his collarbone and had to hire a writer. And when he posted a job for a writer, he meant really a typist, but they got me instead. And so, I was an English major at UMass Boston who had a lifelong interest in drugs, of course. And, I spent my childhood on Airwood and reading about experience reports, et cetera. And, of course, experimenting and, being the Timothy Leary of my high school, et cetera, et cetera. I think I was actually doing proselytizing when I was in middle school. But I got called in for this interview to be a writer. And, it was for, like I said, one of the world's leading cannabinoid scientists at the Center for Drug Discovery at Northeastern. And we hit it off. I think he hired me because I knew a lot about movies. I started out typing his emails and typing different correspondences. And but I'm an autodidact, so I just gather information and digest it and synthesize it into what I know. And then I'm creative. So I'll take what I learn and I'll use it to create new things. And that's kind of the evolution of how I got into drug discovery at the Center for Drug Discovery at Northeastern, and spent the last, as I said, 13 and a half years co-managing around 80 million in federal grant money from NIDA, NIH, being part of these amazing discoveries on the endocannabinoid system, which we've elucidated now, the CB1 and CB2 crystal structures, which is a big deal. It's kind of like discovering a planet, but only microscopically. For those in the audience who don't know, the CB1 and CB2 receptors are the main receptors in the endocannabinoid system. There's quite a lot of receptors, but those are the main ones that most people think about when they think about how cannabis affects us. And also in that lab, or part of that center, is a really renowned serotonin research center where a lot of work, not on psychedelics, but on drugs that target similar receptors in the serotonin system, was and still is under a professor named Ray Booth, who's a very close friend of mine. So my time there was really spent learning, and mainly learning from the amazing people that were there, world-class scientists, and learning about drug discovery, but also getting restless and starting companies on the side. I started 2 cannabis companies in Massachusetts that are recreational cannabis companies, both of which are going to be licensed in Massachusetts hopefully this year. And one of which is a retail, and the other is manufacturing and cultivation, and as well as a formulation company where I was developing formulations for different companies with one of my partners who's currently in Adelia, as well as consulting for major companies for the last like 3 or so years that are in the space, including Advanced Nutrients, which is one of the largest companies in cannabis-based nutrients, and is rapidly expanding into hemp and cannabis genetics and cultivation in California. Of course, I founded Psymposia in 2012, and I love the Psymposia people. I've since resigned from that organization, but we have mutual fondness. But obviously, starting Psymposia really injected me into the psychedelic movement in kind of a big way very early on. Long before this tipping point, as if we might call it. And as you know, Paul, Psymposia was really prominent in putting on events all over the world on psychedelics, and later we became a media company in the space. And I just got to meet so many wonderful people and network with just the most esteemed scientists in the space through Psymposia. And so I guess my career, if you will, sort of is a convergence of drug discovery with being in the psychedelic movement, and playing kind of playing a role in that movement in terms of the education, outreach, advocacy, etc. for since around 2014, I want to say. Before that, I was a big advocate as well. So it was kind of natural that I would find Adelia, which we found Adelia Therapeutics back in February, and now I'm really
2020. About 6 months ago.
Yeah,
okay.
Right. And I'm pleased to say that we're in late stage talks to being acquired, which is excellent. And it's kind of a dream come true. We're going to be fully funded I would say in about 2 weeks. So we've done extremely well, and I have one of the best science teams in the world. I would say hands down, and not my opinion, but the opinion of a lot of the venture groups that have spoken to us. A few of whom I had to turn down, actually, which I've never been in the position of having to turn down money. It's kind of surreal, but it's been a really amazing time, and I just have such an amazing team. My team has done this before. They've had proven success, and I have some really heavy hitters, including Alex Belser, who you probably know, and several other folks. So it's a real honor and privilege to be working with the people that I'm working with, and to bring, I would say, a perspective from the psychedelic movement into drug discovery and into pharmaceutics, which I think we might agree doesn't traditionally necessarily uphold some of those values that, not everybody in the psychedelic movement upholds the same values as we also know. But to bring, the psychedelic movement side of me into the drug discovery side has been really amazing.
Well, and what I'm hearing, Brett, I want to take a sec and just honor everything you mentioned. You have this really interesting past of, English major, hired to be a typist, and then you go right into drug discovery, which, like humanities to reductionist science, that's
Right.
sort of like a huge gap. And then you came back and, got involved with Psymposia, which is more journalistic and English.
Right.
So there's an interesting dynamic there. But then also, there's also another element of integration, which I'm so glad you brought up, which is some of those humbling lessons that we learn from these high dose experiences. How do we integrate that with the drug discovery process? Because I think one of my core criticisms of sort of the so-called psychedelic renaissance, in particular over the last year, as millions of dollars have come into funding, is, from my perspective, there's a significant imbalance in where the funding is going. In other words, a lot of the funding is going to protect IP, for drug discovery, to understand molecules, to do research that maybe we've already done research on, and there's not as much going into training and education and public campaigns that really, I think, is more like the mid to long-term game. So I'd love to hear you dive a little bit deeper into those values that we talk about of the psychedelic renaissance, right? And inclusivity, interconnectedness, a sense of freedom, a sense of open science, like sharing, not necessarily having a bunch of secrets, but being able to share openly. How are you weaving some of those into what you've created with Adelia?
Well, I did bring up values, so I deserve that question. But it's clearly a very dicey area, right? It's fraught with a lot of controversy, and it's fraught with controversy both within the psychedelic movement, as you know, as well as outside of it. And so not everybody agrees, and psychedelics don't represent a particular morality, let's say. They're non-specific amplifiers, as they've been called, right? And so all I can speak to when I say psychedelic values are the values that I feel that I've been imbued with by the psychedelic experience. And those values are really, I would say, boiled down to one value, which is compassion. And it's how you are living with compassion and then acting out of compassion. And so in the drug discovery world, I mean, what we're really up to is ultimately to help patients. And it's ultimately to make not a small impact, but a large impact in helping people. Because it's interesting that the stakes in pharma are huge, right? You have to take millions, billions of dollars sometimes to take a drug to market and go through the FDA trials and everything else. And there's no time to do anything else. There's no money available for anything else. And it's not the fault of these companies. It's really the system that they're living in, right? And that system isn't all bad. It's not like we should go out and dismantle the FDA, right? You know what I mean? It's like it's not like ICE. We don't need to abolish the FDA. We should abolish ICE and then fund the FDA more. But but the truth is, from a compassion perspective, I think that drug discovery in the psychedelic space is really about understanding and empathizing with what the psychedelic experience means and the relationship between the drug and that experience, and the manufacturing of the drug and that experience, and the whole FDA process in that experience. Because if we look at that process, which really starts with the drug discovery and the IP and everything else, and goes all the way through, testing the molecule in human trials, the one unifying factor in all of that is that somebody somewhere is suffering, and we are pledging to stop it, basically. And losing sight of that, and losing sight of exactly how you plan to do that in your company, is, I think, the risk that a lot of these companies that maybe are getting into this space, just seeing dollar signs, are going through. Ultimately, it's fine to be motivated by money, and it's fine to be motivated, by just putting out a drug. But I think what people lose sight of is having compassion for what this experience entails. And obviously, I'm not psychedelic naive. And some people who are coming out with these drugs are. I'm not saying it's a necessity to take these drugs before you put them in patients, but if you want my opinion, it's probably a good thing.
It definitely is a good thing. It's definitely good to have that context. It's like I was reading this story in a newsletter a couple weeks ago where, a mom was with a child in India and went up to Gandhi and said, "Hey, Gandhi, like my child keeps eating sugar. You got to tell him to stop eating sugar,
Yeah,
and Gandhi
come back in a week.
Yeah. And the mom asks, "Why'd you do that?" And Gandhi said, "Well, I had to stop eating sugar before I told someone else to stop eating sugar." So it feels like, I don't know about the executives, or I don't know about sort of the financial people who are involved in this process, but I think for anyone, and this is a big topic of conversation with Compass Pathways, I think this was 2 years ago or a year ago, in terms of like the training that therapists and medical professionals and clinical psychologists are going through as they're applying these substances. It's hard to act with full compassion unless you've gone down those hallways of hell in a psychedelic experience prior, so there is an element of, I think, truth to that. And the fact is, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, like, as the necessity of this medicine continues to grow, right, with COVID and with the mental health crisis and with the stress that people are facing, I think a big question is, can we actually train all these people in time to train therapists to be able to hold space? I mean, how are you thinking about that dynamic? How do you think about the dynamic of the scalability of psychedelic medicine and ensuring that even when scalability comes into the process, that the integrity of the experience still holds true within that container?
Well, the process of let me back up. The psychedelics isn't, just the drugs that are going to be done in 6 to 8 hours in like a clinic, right? It encompasses such a huge and I think ever expanding universe of what we might consider to be psychedelic, from molecules to plants to technology to techniques that get you there. They include things that I would say are truly psychedelic, like, in other words, manifesting the psyche from like a psychotherapeutic perspective, as well as novel anti-inflammatories, as well as like serotonergics. I mean, some people consider, kappa agonists to be psychedelics, right? Some people consider datura and atropine and scopolamine to be psychedelic. I might think that that's kind of a misunderstanding of what psychedelic is, but a low dose, microdose, different biologics. I mean, all of these things, right? Our definition of psychedelics are like the universe, always expanding, right? And then sometimes without us seeing it. And then there's controversy with what we call psychedelics. So I think that with respect to psychedelics that have to be done in a clinical therapeutic setting where you need trained therapists, I have to agree with you. I think that there is a kind of a hidden, let's say, a hidden risk to this whole industry where what the kind of the dirty secret that people aren't talking about isn't just that it's hard to scale the training of therapists, but it's also that the cost is very high, and that as so long as there's just a medical model, what we're going to see, I think, is a lot of people that are looking to qualify under that medical model for a clinical treatment, which would, I think, make the prospect of reimbursement farther off in the future, and make private funding or private payment for these therapies the norm for the next however many years, which is unfortunate, right? Because a lot of people, and this is part of the access issue. This is why a lot of people are, I think, rightly pointing out that access is a big issue, including some of the implications around race and ethnicity with respect to that. I have a controversial stance on this as somebody who works in pharma, which is that I think what we call recreational or decriminalized sets and settings for ritualized use is not only a long-standing method of use of these entheogens, but also more of a practical way to go about bringing these to more and more people, and arguably even a more efficacious way in some cases, although I think that that's also very controversial. And we've seen with a lot of the data coming out of the clinic that controlling set and setting in that way for subsets of populations, and for a lot of people, let's face it, that are in these studies at Hopkins and elsewhere, a really powerful thing that really aids in the experience. But I'm for cognitive freedom. I believe that we should have the right to take these with and without medical professionals around. And I think that each mode, if you will, of how we take these has unique opportunities in and of itself that it can unlock. And we're just beginning to figure out what I've once termed the architecture of placebo, i.e. really the details of how set and setting actually influence the outcome of an experience. Nobody knows more about that probably than the CIA, but I don't know if that's declassified yet.
MK Ultra coming back to a city near you. Hopefully not.
Yeah. Hopefully not. Well, I don't know. Maybe they can release some of this information and make it. A lot of it is released, but I think ultimately every set and setting has, and every drug combination with set and setting has its own unique DNA almost. Whether it's taking mushrooms in a forest or taking psilocybin in a cot in a psychiatrist's office.
Or ideally, like in a nice, comfy couch, and like what they do at Johns Hopkins. Those rooms look comfy.
They do.
You got Mary next to you, and it's all good that way. But I love what you bring up. Oakland's been doing a great job with this, and you're probably keeping up to date on the Grow, Gather, Gift framework that they're putting into place. I think they recently just submitted a new resolution to the city council to allow them to actually start to host ceremonies. And as part of that, they said, hey, basically, if the federal government tries to come after us, the city of Oakland is responsible for covering the legal costs in case they do try to come after us. So I think that's a really interesting model that's starting to develop. And it dovetails well with what you were talking about, Brett, with, there are these different settings. And for some people, let's say like the 20% of people who have deep clinical conditions, early childhood trauma, alcoholism, deep PTSD, right? Like a clinical setting with maybe a therapist or two therapists is probably necessary for the first experiences, sort of like what they've done with the MDMA therapy in the MAPS trials, right? Like over a 12-week period. And, like as I found out in doing synthesis in the Netherlands for about a year, like most people who are interested in this, everyone has their shit, everyone has their issues, but a lot of people can handle it in like a group setting and a group dynamic. So it's sort of like, it will not, like the psychedelic renaissance will not be either or, but it will have to be both and to ensure that there's accessibility, to ensure that the medical people can go that way. If you feel comfortable doing it in a group, you can do that way. And I think having that diversity of options is very psychedelic in itself.
Well, and the good news from a libertarian perspective is that whether we prohibit it or not, people are going to do it anyway. So, the free market will win out at the end of the day. And, the prohibitionists always lose.
Exactly. So let's get a little bit deeper into Adelia, because we haven't, you mentioned her a little bit, how you're a couple weeks away from being fully funded, but I don't even know some of the specifics of it. So I'd love if you could just get into the specifics of what are you doing in drug development? What type of science are you looking at? What sort of compounds are you looking at? I would love if you could just bring us a little deeper into sort of what's going on with Adelia.
Well, unfortunately, I can't bring you too deeply because I'm under some NDAs. But okay. I guess you call it more of a gag order. But I can say that we have a platform for drug discovery, which we feel can improve the safety and efficacy of these molecules for use in clinic and for other purposes outside of the clinic, where we feel we can create better standardized products with lower toxicity profiles. And we have proprietary ways of developing these compounds. And our goal is to really synthesize a series of these compounds, test them, and then let the data kind of dictate where we go from there. Because I think one of the issues with a lot of companies in the space is that they latch on to what they think is a great idea. It's kind of one molecule, and then they don't prepare for the chance that whatever they have placed their poker chip on might fail. So having kind of a broader outlook allows us to have a number of possibilities for development, and that's where we are now. So, I have a very, very experienced team, both on the, the clinical psychology front, as well as the drug discovery front and the chemistry front. Everybody on my team is, a proven leader in either the psychedelic and or the drug discovery space. The team is Alex Novoroshkin, who's like a world renowned drug delivery expert and formulation organic chemist that I've worked with for about the last year. Mike Palfreyman, who's a veteran of drug discovery. Clint Canal, who's one of the best published pharmacologists in the psychedelic space. Alex Belzer, who myself, Josh Hartzell, who's really well-known chemist in the cannabinoid and natural product space, who oversaw R&D at a number of major companies, including public companies, and myself, and then we have an interim CFO who's a really accomplished investment banker who, is securing us this acquisition deal. So everybody on this team is really amazing, and I think it really starts with the team. And they've done this before, and personally, I don't think that everybody has to be, I want to amend the previous statement that I made about, the compassion and psychedelics. I think you can be compassionate without having taken psychedelics, and I don't think everybody on your team has to take it. But I think in this space, one of the things that I've strived to do is to have equal representation from people that have developed drugs before, brought drugs to market successfully, exited companies successfully, and representation from, the psychedelic movement and people that have been, kicking around this movement when it was a small trickle of people instead of the, the ocean that it's becoming.
Right. Yeah. And that leads into the next question, which is I'd love just to hear your general sort of thoughts on how has the space shifted in the last, let's say, since Michael Pollan's book came out. I feel like that's a good sort of watershed moment. Like from your perspective, how have things changed? And I can share my thoughts as well with those.
Yeah. I think that things have certainly changed in a big way. And Michael Pollan's book represented a tipping point, but I mean, the thing about tipping points is it's easy to just kind of see the point and think like, oh, like there's nothing building to it, but the boulder wouldn't be able to fall on the other side of the hill unless people had pushed it up the whole time, right? So I think what's happened in the space is, 10, 12, 15, 20 years ago, there was a small dedicated group of people that, believed in this subject matter, believed in these medicines, knew this day would come in their heart, but were told all the time that they were crazy, that they were nuts. There was a lot of stigma. We had to deal with the stigma. We had to spend a lot of money out of pocket with no iota of understanding that we would ever be reimbursed at all. The strength of our convictions and not all that much else, besides the fact that we had these experiences that we were motivated by. And, it was a small, close-knit group. And there was really more of a family atmosphere, I think, even for people that disagreed. And there was always disagreement. But I think that when money gets involved in anything, maybe calling it the root of all evil is a little extreme, but I think that there is a tendency for for money to be sort of like the water on the fire of this field in a way. And so the more people kind of came to this and thinking that they had just discovered it themselves, the more there was this colonialist kind of vibe where I think the people that had been, let's say, the OGs of the scene started to feel, both pushed out and forgotten, and that more than that a lot of the knowledge and the accumulated wisdom of the space was also being disregarded. And that's when it was, I think that the real shift happened in terms of the let's say the vibe of the psychedelic movement, which is now similar to the cannabis movement, I think, just cracking open and becoming much less of a family and more of what we've seen with a collection of brands, pump and dump schemes with a few good companies and good people thrown in, and business as usual. So I think what the Michael Pollan book did was it obviously signaled to the public that this was sort of acceptable for mainstream consumption, both literally and figuratively. But what it did for the people that have got us here is it sort of, I would say, it took credit for all of their work, and it created sort of a false narrative about what this movement is. And like when people tell me like, oh, we're in the psychedelic, like I'm so sick of people saying we're in the psychedelic renaissance. I've been hearing it since like 1995.
Yeah.
Like I've been hearing it literally for, what is that?
25 years ago.
Years, yeah. I should have been able to do that math a lot easier. But yeah, I mean, we've been in the psychedelic renaissance for 25 years. I mean, how long was the Italian Renaissance? What, 50?
Probably 60 or 70 or 80 years. Maybe that's what it is.
She's walking around being like, "Hey, we're in the Renaissance." Probably not.
I don't think that. I don't think that is the case.
But because it was a zeitgeist, and unfortunately, I think that the zeitgeist is over. But so many people think it's just beginning.
You think it's over?
In a way. But
I think it's maturing. I think it's going from pioneering and early adopters to like
the industry is maturing. The industry is starting. But the zeitgeist, I mean, the zeitgeist is like, that's like that spark of intelligentsia and inspiration. And that was almost like mirroring the psychedelic trip itself. And I think that that's kind of, like the era of like a close-knit, drink the Kool-Aid family time, rainbow gathering, we're all in this together. I think that's over. But that's all right. I mean, it's a new era. You can mourn that all you want, but the truth is, how many people were being locked up, and how many less people were able to get help for these things, were able to talk about these things back then. I mean, the reason it was a zeitgeist is because it was also really repressive in terms of the reaction of greater society to what we're dealing with. So I don't mourn that, and I'm not going to focus on the negative. Hell, I'm part of the corporate delictocracy or whatever. But I have eyes and I have a heart, and I know that something special kind of died about 5 years ago.
Interesting, because when I got involved in 2000, about 5 years ago, is when I started Third Wave, almost exactly 5 years ago. It was September 2015, and so my understanding of the space is just in the last 5 years. I've been doing psychedelics since I was 19. I was more like the Timothy Leary of my college or fraternity, even. Like I would bring out everyone to do mushrooms, in the winter, or no, in the fall and in the spring, and we do acid together, and it was a ton of fun, always outside. And when I got involved in the space in 2015, the first conference that I went to was in Tepoztlán. It was the Global Ibogaine Conference, and had a chance to meet a lot of people there. And in fact, my first friend in the psychedelic space was Brian Pace, who you know of, and there's some now interesting history there, which we won't get into. But I met Brian at the Ibogaine conference, and so it was interesting to see, because at that point still it was like, a lot of people were there who were either scientists, researchers, or addicts, people who had previously healed a lot from the Ibogaine and were there to connect with others. So it was such a diverse, dynamic group. And then I was in Prague later that year for the Beyond Psychedelics conference, and there was, like, even at that point, still like a close knit. I remember I would just stand in line and I would get, I talked with Roland Griffiths, or I talked with Ben Sessa, or, there were all these great people there. And then when Michael Pollan's book came out, it just felt like that close knitness that I had even come to know and love sort of expanded. And I think from my perspective, the big shift is when I first got involved in the space, this is 2015, I was an entrepreneur, and I was sort of, a very public entrepreneur. And I got some blowback and a lot of skepticism and a lot of like.
I remember giving you some, actually.
Oh yeah, totally, yeah. Oh, you did, yeah.
But I tried about it though.
Oh, it was great. Like for the most part, I take feedback and well and all that. And then I think that to me signifies the biggest shift in the space over the last, let's just even say, year and a half, has been it went from a space that was largely academic, research, activists, drug policy, to entrepreneurs, finance, executives. And that's been an interesting sort of shift, because on the one hand, the space needed that. Like, the space needed operators to take something that's very chaotic and nebulous and sort of create enough of a container around it so that it could become much more accessible. At the same time, it sort of neutered a lot of the magic from psychedelics because of that same reason. And so I see it less as like something special died, and see it more as like we're still going through this evolution of how do we balance those two opposites? How do we balance sort of the open beauty of like the rainbow gatherings with, like the finance dude who maybe has only ever microdosed on LSD and has no interest in ever like seeing anyone naked in a kumbaya circle. I don't know, like that. There's a lot of extremes in that range.
Right, and the kumbaya circle, somebody was getting raped in the background, like somebody was overdosing somewhere, like people were getting arrested. Like there wasn't this idyllic thing around the Rainbow Gathering or around like any happening in the last 20 years. Like that's not really what I'm saying when I say something died, but I guess that I'm not saying it was better. I'm saying it was different, and it felt better from the perspective of being part of something, of having that familial presence sometimes. But of course, there's an extreme bad side to that too that can emerge, right? What do they say? proximity breeds contempt. Is that the saying?
Yeah.
So
Familiarity
right,
breeds contempt.
there you go. So I mean, I'm not glorifying or idealizing the past either, and I don't want to be one of these curmudgeons about it. I'm not driving a horse and buggy and living without electricity either. I can adapt to the times well enough. But one thing that you said, I think, was it triggered something that I've been thinking about. You mentioned container and the need to have a kind of a sturdy container. And I've oftentimes described to people the psychedelic experience as like you open up like this vortex or wormhole where like all possibilities kind of exist. It's like the Schrodinger's box, right? You open it and you jump in, and it encompasses all of these unknowns and all of the mysteries of life and things that we can't even possibly put words to, right? Which is why we call this an ineffable experience. And really, the container for that experience is, the set and setting. It's the SOPs. It's putting people in place. It's safety, and we try to kind of shape that experience, but it's still like infinity, it's very interesting that you mentioned this container issue, because I do think that there is always this tension between the fluidity and the concrete, the water in the pipes, if you will, right? We can create these structures that can contain the tremendous tsunami of all that is the psychedelic experience, and we can try to do that, but it's still beyond us. And so I think that part of maybe the what upsets people, like I don't want to name drop, but some of the folks that I think that are real, Eric Davis and folks that are real amazing philosophical minds in this space and have written terrific things. There's this sense that a lot of that mystery, that weirdness, that is epitomized by the psychedelic experience, that is innate in, let's say, esotericism, and that can be traced back to Eleusis. A lot of that, when it's combined with all of this brand happy, Silicon Valley inspired, biz pop stuff, it just gets swallowed up and eaten alive, and it represents a facade, because the facade of the brand, whether it's Adelia's brand or whether it's whatever brand, masks the infinity behind these experiences that just totally transcend brands, transcend money, transcend all of our notions of things.
Transcends duality. I mean, it transcends
there you go.
The existence or the matrix, or how we know to operate. How we know
Right. And we experience non-duality, and it's that non-dual state that is Schrodinger's box, right? And all we can do, I think, is kind of open that portal and guard around it, and we can't forget that. I think it's important that we remember that in the words of McKenna, like you don't know all that much. What did he say about being a monkey? Or so you don't know that much monkey? Or I don't know. I never remember.
I don't remember the exact.
He has so many good ones.
I like the McKenna quote. I like the McKenna quote about, because this sort of goes into what you're saying. Like, if you trust, like, just throw yourself into the abyss, and you'll find out that there's a feather bed waiting for you.
Nature loves courage. Although that's
nature loves courage.
Unfortunately, that's it's not always the case, as we know. And even for Terrence, as Dennis's book points out, Terrence had a profoundly bad series of mushroom trips that got him to stop taking mushrooms, and so I think that there there can be a lot of mythologizing incorrectly around, the featherbed that awaits instead of the, eternal nail bed that could await some individuals. There's a lot that we don't know, positive and negative, and there's things that we can control, but they're about 0.00000 to the 100th time percent, 0.1% of the whole picture. There's so much more that we can't. Ironically, we're tasked by the FDA to, do the exact opposite of just throw up our hands to the mystery of the universe.
Exactly.
We have to data. We just have to put together a big package of data. But I think if we're going to be honest and really embody the spirit of this, that I like to think of as the spirit, which is kind of the Robert Anton Wilson school of psychedelics that I ascribe to. We have to admit what we don't know, and I think we need to preserve the mystery.
One, I think that's a larger cultural issue. I don't think that's not only true of psychedelics and what's going on with psychedelics right now, but I think that's also true of the general sort of scientism that we now see that dominates and is pervasive everywhere. In other words, we've lost the mystery, we've lost the awe, we've lost sort of this feminine nature to our existence because of industrialization. And so there is this element of like, psychedelics are non-specific amplifiers. In some ways, the issues that they're amplifying are these issues that exist amongst all of culture anyway. Right. And now through the lens of psychedelics, we're seeing because I totally agree with you. Like, we need to preserve that. And I think the challenge is, how do you do that when the only supposed route or accepted route to acceptance is the FDA, which is a purely masculine, a purely like data, a purely like everything has to be in the light sort of approach, right? There isn't room for mystery in the FDA approval process.
Yeah, well,
I think that's challenging.
Absolutely challenging. But again, that is the challenge, and so I would hasten to say that most people who are embarking on this process aren't really grappling with these questions because they haven't come from this place of reverence for that mystery. So how can they even think about incorporating, however indirectly, this idea of preserving a mystery or the esotericism of this, the understanding of ineffability, if you will, and integrating that with the drug discovery process. You kind of have to come out of that world in order to do that, and that's what I think our biggest differentiator is as Psymposia. But as a culture, you said that, well, you get this happening in other aspects of the culture with respect to this tension. And I would agree, but I would also say that psychedelics are somewhat unique in that the reality of the brands themselves kind of still, they have a tendency to disintegrate into what they are in these experiences. One of the characteristics of these experiences is that it points to, the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. It points to the fallacy of language, that these words and that this architecture of language, including the brands that we're building, including, the symbols that we're generating, are,
it's a facade.
Right. It is. I mean, it is and it isn't. Right. It's like it. Right. Plato would say that it is. Right. But from a nature perspective, it's almost like nature kind of laughs at that, because these brands are sort of our own little pet sandcastles that we build, and then they crumble in the face of the harsh physical realities of surviving on Earth, or surviving in a corporeal body, or whatever it is. And I think that psychedelics, Terrence also said something about how psychedelics can't be co-opted by an institution because they want to rip down institutions. I don't know if I would go that far, right? Because certainly some might argue that they have been co-opted by some agencies in the past, and there's certainly a lot of, I think, concern about their ability to be, brave new world again. But I would agree with Terrence that we can't control what they do to people. They unlock something in people, and we can only try to control it. And to the extent that we can control it, we have influence. But again, I would argue that our influence is somewhat greatly overstated. I can't tell you how many case reports and everything that I've read about people that, oh yeah, I took mushrooms at a party, I thought I was going to have a good time, like I ended up having this incredible revelation, and I cured all of this stuff in my background. Like, wouldn't that suggest that set and setting isn't all that's there, right? Like I think that for some people these things really unlock a sense of the divine self within. For other people, they don't have that effect. And then for some people, there's like a range where the set and setting can really play a big role. And those people may be the majority. Like, I'm not going to say that set and setting don't have effect for people that aren't drug naive. Like, set and setting have effect, like no doubt about it. But it's not all that there is. And there can be, and there are many exceptions to the rules.
Good. Well, we could keep going. We could probably talk for another hour and a half, if not longer, about all of this stuff. But we do have a few people here, and I want to save a little bit time at the end for Q&A. So if any of you all have been listening to this, have questions about Adelia, have questions about Brett and his background in cannabis, have any questions about the mystery or brands or anything like that we've been talking about, now's a chance to just throw something in the chat or the Q&A, and then and we'll get those questions over to Brett. Brett, where are you right now? Are you in Massachusetts?
Yes. Yeah.
Your house?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great. And have you traveled at all, or have you been mostly in?
Yes, but I'm not advocating that people break the social conventions of this pandemic. But sure. Yes, I've been doing lots of traveling. We've been traveling every week. Yeah. I figure if I'm gonna work remotely, then why the hell do I want to stay stationary? So I've gone away every week for the last month and a half or so.
That's great. I'm going to Montana Friday. I have a friend who has land bordering glacier and a yurt.
Nice. Wow.
That's off grid, so I get to chill for a little bit. It's nice to get in the wilderness
before you go out there.
I will. Yeah, I will. All right. The first question is from LJ Hoke, which is, when will the FDA approve the first psychedelic product, like the first psychedelic drug development product?
I think that the first one's probably going to be MDMA. Wouldn't you think? Since
I think Rick, in a recent article, Rick said 2023.
Yeah.
Is when they were looking at like the approval process for the breakthrough therapy designation. So there will be clinics that start to open up and offer that next year.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think by 2023 it will become commercially available.
Yep.
And then I think psilocybin was something like 2024.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a long time.
Yeah.
And that's where we didn't get deep into this in the conversation, but I go back to decrim, and it feels like, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement and the defund the police movement, and who knows, with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris potentially, they're both anti-drug war,
right?
For the drug war, but that feels like a faster path towards access to psychedelic medicine than some of the clinical stuff. But that opens up a whole conversation in itself, which we'll save for some other time. So that 2023. Any other questions that are coming up?
I've been so informative that nobody has any questions. I've just answered.
Fantastic. So well spoken, Brett. And you probably have the best goatee. You're probably one of the best goatees I've ever seen, and the hair as well. Really, really done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't ask about what you're up to.
Yeah. So what are we up to? I live in Miami at the moment. I moved to Miami in COVID, and
wow.
With Third Wave, we just launched like a membership site. So we now have like a back end with a login. We have a forum. We have our core stuff up there. We're rolling out like a database, kind of like Psychedelic Support has, but it'll be retreat centers, clinics, therapists, and coaches that we'll roll out as well, that we'll provide support for. And then right at this point in time, we're just finalizing like the initial team build. So we raised a little bit of investment earlier this year and at the end of last year, and then kind of the final team is in place, the initial team, building out our advisory board, and then going and we'll raise another round probably in November. And the focus is really on helping to create like an educational platform that from like, especially for people who are more psychedelic naive, from the first point of when they learn about psychedelics, whether it's microdosing or ayahuasca or psilocybin, we can help them along the journey to ensure that they can find not only the education that they need through materials, but also, connect them to a retreat or connect them to a clinic or help them find a coach if they're in Oakland or Denver, or a guide, someone they can work with. So just helping you create a bit of a container of trust within the psychedelic ecosystem, because I think one of the big challenges that we're aware of is like, I think decrim is going to outpace the clinical. So as decrim continues to grow, how do you ensure that doesn't get too chaotic, and that people have access to education, that people have access to training, that people have access to, like recommendations, good information, et cetera, et cetera. So that's more or less the direction we're headed professionally. And then I'm just, it's running a startup, as you're aware, it can be stressful.
Oh, yeah.
It's longer hours, but generally, like all things considered, I feel very fortunate for the health and the position that we're in and the team that we have, and a lot of good things are coming together.
Well, congrats. Awesome.
Thank you. And it's good to see you. We spoke at Horizons for a little bit, where we got into the Eric Davis thing a little bit. That was good. And that's kind of like our yearly conversation that we have usually at Horizons. So I'm glad we got to do this at this time, because I don't know if Horizons will happen this year.
Oh, I know.
With
COVID stuff, I don't think it's happening in person for sure. But did it get canceled online? Is it going to join the?
I bet they'll do something online. Yeah, I bet they'll do something
online. You got another question in here.
Oh, we got a question.
You got a question.
Okay. Gaurav asks, how can we standardize plant-based entheogens so they fit the current paradigms of drug development? So, for example, you get it. I don't need to explain it.
Well, there's two ways to kind of approach that. One is to define what plant-based means, right? So are you talking actually is extracted and purified from a plant, or are you talking about synthesized chemically? Because psilocybin can obviously be synthesized chemically, and that's what groups like Compass, I think, are planning to do. So the easiest thing from an FDA standpoint is certainly to have a single molecule, right? So the molecule would be synthetic, and then you actually have to prove that the synthetic route makes only one version of the molecule that you're looking at. If it has what's called a chiral center, which means that it has sort of a left hand and right hand. But for psilocybin, you are basically creating a synthetic route that the FDA, approves of, that you're able to say, hey, this is the same thing every time, and isn't a mixture of different isomers, which are different versions of that molecule, but a single molecule.
And I believe. Go ahead.
No, sorry.
No, I was just saying, I read something about MindMed was trying to do something with ayahuasca, and so I feel like there might be a couple companies that are looking into that, but I don't know the specifics,
Yeah,
around that process.
you can have mixtures.
Mhm.
It's just a lot more difficult, and to be honest, I think that plant-based medicine should be used outside the clinic. If I'm going to be really honest, I think that there's a time and a place for clinical use of psychedelics, and a time and a place for more ritualistic use of plant medicines. And to me, the plant medicine is really what you use when you want to kind of take the reins of your healing into your own hands. And then using molecules in a clinic is really a different story. It's when you need the safety and support of medical professionals. And you can certainly have medical professionals at a shamanic ceremony too. I'm not saying that you want a good, strong support system there too. So I'm not advocating that people drink ayahuasca in a Brooklyn basement with nobody there. I'm just saying that if given the opportunity, if I had suicidal ideation and I was going to hurt myself and I was a danger to myself or others, I would want to be able to go to a clinic and have that acute suicidality dealt with there around medical professionals. If I was going to want to have, let's say, a peyote experience with a Native American church, which I was lucky enough to do not too long ago, I would certainly not want to have to choose between the clinic and going there and singing songs that they have sung for thousands of years and drinking peyote with their rituals. And I mean, it's like night and day, right? It's like, it's like Target versus the church. It's like, so I wouldn't want to have to choose. But for me personally, I think that, because coming out of the cannabinoid space, there's obviously a huge effort to study what I think is now being kind of co-opted into psychedelics. What we call the Entourage Effect, which is this notion of combining different compounds in specific ratios for a synergistic effect. In the plant medicine space, I think that one of the big differences is that you're accounting for what the FDA calls the placebo effect. You're not trying, when you develop a drug in the FDA, you're convincing the FDA and everybody else that your drug works better than placebo. When you use plant medicine, you're tapping into the placebo for the effect. So I mean, honestly, you're tapping into the placebo for the effect in the clinic too, because the set and setting provides that as well. It's not like you're ever escaping that. But I think that the plant medicine route is more of a pointed integration of what we call placebo, but which I think ultimately we'll have a greater understanding of.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing that. One analogy that I want to share that sort of mirrors that is I read this in a Medium post about the lotus flower. Ann Other, the MDMA therapist who wrote Trust, Surrender, Receive.
Oh yeah.
So she has this fantastic analogy that we often first, like when we plant a lotus flower, we first till the soil and make sure the soil is really healthy. And that's like the MDMA therapy. That's healing the trauma. It's going back into our stories and being able to make sure that we have good soil. And then the psilocybin or the LSD is sort of the stem of the lotus flower. So your consciousness is the seed that gets planted in the dirt. And then the stem is the psilocybin and LSD that comes after MDMA. And then the lotus flower that opens up, those are the plant medicines. That's ayahuasca or San Pedro or 5-MeO-DMT. That's sort of like the crown chakra that's opening up to experience the full beauty. And I always just love that analogy because I think for many reasons, but it's a really good way to explain, like, this isn't just a quick fix. This isn't just one and done. This isn't like you want to just bust yourself into a 5-MeO ceremony and come out. This requires intention. This requires like healing first before you can fully open up sometimes to the profundity of existence. You know, like, it's not all rainbows and butterflies right away. And for some people it is, but for a lot of people there's stuff to work through first. So.
Yeah. Indeed.
All right. Well, we'll wrap up, Brett. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for popping on. This is going to be fun to record and later publish. I'd like to also publish it on our podcast because we haven't done anything yet. So I'll let you know about that. And it's always fun to talk with you. We always have such good conversations. And I appreciate you. I appreciate your Facebook posts. I appreciate your honesty. I appreciate the perspectives that you hold and the integrity that you have. And, you know, it's been great to be your friend and to have another chance to connect here today.
Well, thanks so much, Paul. I really appreciate it. And I wish you all the best. Okay.
Thank you, Brett. Till next time.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining the Psychedelic Insider series, brought to you by Microdose and the Conscious Fund. Visit our website at www.microdose.buzz.